This email is from David. Here's what he writes. I was 5 years old in the summer of 1976, and me and my brother were on a 2-week camping trip with my grandparents in North Idaho. I was born in North Idaho, but my parents moved us to Seattle, Washington when I was 4 years old. So visiting my grandparents in Idaho for a month or two in the summer became a regular thing when I was a kid. My grandfather was an avid outdoorsman and had all the gear with a truck and a camper and a couple of Honda 90 trail bikes. Both my grandpa and grandma were loving and kind people and loved to go camping in the mountains of North Idaho. We were camped in my grandpa's favorite camping spot on a creek near the St. Joe River. There was another party camping nearby, and they stopped to let us know that a cougar had been seen earlier that morning walking down the middle of the gravel road, and they wanted us to be aware that it could still be around. My grandpa thanked them and let them know that he would tell them if he saw it. My grandpa took me fishing while my brother and grandma worked on collecting firewood for the fire pit. There was a part of the creek that my grandpa could walk in without getting too wet and fish a really good area on the other side of the creek. I followed a little bit into the creek, and then I lost interest and started looking for cool rocks. My grandpa wasn't very far away, maybe 30 feet or so, when his line got a hit from a pretty big trout, and he yelled for me to get the net that he had forgotten on the campsite of the creek. Well, I ran and got the net, and I started heading back through the water to give it to my grandpa. And after tripping and falling in the water, I quickly got up and looked at my grandpa's direction. I heard him yelling to me, "Stay there." I saw movement on the bank of the creek in front of my grandpa. It was a gigantic cougar reaching down into the water and grabbing the fish off my grandpa's fishing line. It happened so fast that I didn't know what to do. I froze, and my grandpa started swearing and yelling at the cougar and waving his arms in the air, and the cougar stopped and dropped the fish and started heading into the water toward my grandpa while it was looking over its shoulder at the bank of the creek. A large black figure walked on 2 legs and crashed through the trees. My grandpa dropped his fishing pole as the cougar ran into his legs while running away from this black creature. The cougar was gone in an instant. My grandpa left his fishing pole, and he grabbed me by the neck of my shirt, and he picked me up and started heading out of the water to the campsite of the creek. He didn't say a word and didn't stop walking fast until we were almost to camp. He stopped and put me down, and he told me to be quiet and let him talk to Grandma. Grandpa raised his voice a little and said to Grandma, "That damn Sasquatch is back again." Grandma started laughing and said, "Well, you tell him we're not leaving." I wasn't sure what to think. I didn't feel scared, but more curious. My brother thought that my grandpa was just kidding around and grabbed his bike and went off toward the road. My brother was 9 years old, and he was an independent kid. That night we had a campfire, and I almost forgot what happened earlier in the day. The air was warm with a slight cool breeze coming from the creek. We heard a couple of strange noises in the bushes, but my grandparents were really good at distracting us. It was time for s'mores. Grandpa was an early riser and went out to see if he could find his fishing pole. He looked around a little bit, but he couldn't find it. My brother was running around with a really cool stick that looked like a machine gun. He was pretending to shoot the enemy and was running in and out of the bushes. My brother came out of the bushes and called for my grandpa to come look at something that he had found. So I ran over to see what was going on because my brother always had a way of finding really cool stuff. My brother asked Grandpa, "Is your fishing pole really a tree-catching pole?" He pointed over to a really big cedar tree, and the fishing pole was leaning up against the trunk of the tree. It was almost like someone had placed it there for safekeeping. The line was broken and the metal loop on the tip was bent, but my grandpa said it was almost as good as new. The rest of the day was uneventful, but that night I will never forget. We were all sitting around the campfire listening to some music on a radio tape player. My grandpa said, "The boys are back in town." About 2 minutes later, we heard a whoop coming from the creek area where we had seen the Sasquatch. 2 more whoops came from the opposite direction over the gravel road that leads to our camp and then out toward the St. Joe River. The whoops continued for a few minutes until it felt like they were right next to us, and my grandpa told Grandma to take the boys to the camper and get the beds ready. As we were walking to the camper, a huge crash came from the bushes where my brother found the fishing pole. 2 large black figures came out of the bushes looking like they were wrestling on the ground, and they were making deep growling sounds. They didn't seem to be fighting, but they were playing, I think. The growling sounds reminded me of 2 dogs playing together, but really deep sounding. They acted like they didn't know we were there. My grandpa was calm as can be, and my grandmother said some swear words, and she pushed me and my brother toward the camper. And I remember looking back, and the 2 figures stood up and they walked toward the creek. And I remember hearing them crashing through the water, and then it was silent. There was no sound except for the creek flowing. My grandpa said, "The song was right. The boys are back in town." He laughed and headed to the cooler for a cold snack, a beer, and sat back down at the campfire. Well, I didn't feel scared at all. Maybe because my grandparents were so calm and easygoing about what was happening. My grandmother went to bed, but us 2 boys and Grandpa stayed up all night listening to the radio and listening to the night sounds. We didn't see or hear the Sasquatch for the next 2 days. My brother was oblivious about stuff, and it seemed like he had forgotten what had happened. Well, I was thinking about it all the time, but I wasn't scared. My grandpa said the boys, the Sasquatches, were the keepers of the forest, and they protected everything there. My grandfather died when I was 16, and I remember talking with my grandma about the cougars stealing the fish and then running into my grandpa. My grandma verified the story by reading from her diary. She kept clear and detailed notes about all the times they went camping, and that wasn't the only time Sasquatch had visited them. I ended up moving back to North Idaho when I was 22, and I took care of my grandma until she died when I was 28. My mother ended up buying my grandparents' house, and she moved from Seattle to North Idaho. My mother died several years later, and my brother and I cleaned out the house and we sold it. I have most of the diaries and other things that my grandma wrote about. I will be compiling the information, and I will eventually write about the experiences my grandparents had, as well as the experiences I have had.